Welcome, everyone. I'm going to get us started. I want to be respectful of your time, and it is 11 o'clock. We're very lucky today to be here with John J Ciafone, and my name is Elizabeth Aloni. I'm with Schneps Media. Schneps Media is the largest local New York City media company with over 70 newspapers, magazines, websites, webinars, podcasts, and events across Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, Westchester, and Long Island. We're thrilled today to welcome John J Ciafone to talk about your loved ones that have suffered from COVID, but also very important, estate planning, wills, and trusts. I want to tell you a little bit about John. John J Ciafone, Esquire, is an attorney licensed over 25 years in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. state and federal courts. Ciafone was born, raised, and continues to live in Queens with his wife and 3 children. Ciafone is a product of public schools and served from secretary to president of Community School Board 30, serving the neighborhoods of Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, Astoria, Long Island City, Sunnyside, and Woodside. Ciafone won the school board elections with the highest number of votes, had a perfect attendance record, and created the largest increase in seats in schools in the district. Ciafone has been on Steinway Street serving the needs of the community, and is a trial attorney, New York State small claims arbitrator, New York State certified mediator, and has been appointed by several Supreme Court justices to serve as referee and guardian ad litem in the Supreme Court. Ciafone served as intern for Governor Mario Cuomo and was recently appointed administrative law judge hearing officer for oath by former New York City Chief Administrative Law Judge and Commissioner Fidel Del Val. Ciafone conducts free seminars and webinars to the public and writes a weekly law news column and is an EMT paramedic trained EMS first responder who has volunteered during the COVID-19 pandemic. Wow, what an amazing man, and we're thrilled to have him here today. So John, please share with us.
All right, thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. I want to thank you. I want to thank Schneps Communications for providing these webinar series to the public. It's a great public service, and they're free of charge. You can't go wrong. And today we're going to give you a lot of information you won't find on the news, or if you go on the internet, it's very hard to find. We give you the facts here, and we try to instill upon you the importance of understanding what's going on. I'm an attorney. I've been doing this for over 25 years, a trial attorney. I also work for oath. I'm an administrative law judge hearing officer. I've handled thousands of cases for people in this city, people that are issued sanitation tickets, certain NYPD tickets. A lot of the cases, the criminal cases, were taken out of criminal court by the city council and the mayor. They took them out of the criminal court and brought it to us at oath. And basically, for example, if you go in the park and you're drinking a beer, that's a violation. Normally that would be in criminal court. That's now before us at oath. If you violate Vision Zero, that's the driving excessively in terms of speed, motion, or going through stop signs and hitting or almost hitting a pedestrian or bicyclist, that goes before us. Those are normally criminal cases, but now we have that jurisdiction under oath. In addition to 25 city agencies we handle. And I'm proud to serve again as an administrative judge, law judge hearing officer, the great people of this borough of Queens and Brooklyn, all people of New York City we serve. And we help. And that's the difference in oath. We try to level the playing field. We make everyone start at the same level, and we help those who are unrepresented or can't afford counsel. Getting an attorney is very expensive today. So that's what we do. We provide real justice, real assistance to the people of this great city. I'm going to start the seminar. I'm also letting everybody know, if you haven't, I'm running for civil court judge in Queens County on the Democratic Party line. I'm not supported by the machine, the special interests, or the party bosses. I'm looking out for you, ladies and gentlemen, you, the people I've always served, whether it was on community school board, whether it was at oath or as an EMS trained and licensed first responder. I worked during the pandemic, which we are still receiving. Unfortunately, we're still under the pandemic. I've worked at Elmhurst Hospital, volunteered at some and other hospitals throughout the city. I'm proud to do that. I'm proud to do that because I think it's important to help everyday people. And so let's start. And the starting point here is the nursing homes and the hospitals. Of course, this COVID-19 has been devastating, not only on the numbers of human lives that have perished, families who have suffered, but the economic ravages that it has caused now. I look outside my window, I'm on Steinway Street in Astoria, and still businesses are shuttered, closed. It's devastating. Why? Because people are not working, people are not communicating with each other, people are sad and depressed. For those who have lost their loved ones, they've suffered the worst horror possible. Why? Because if you went to a hospital and your loved one was in there suffering from COVID-19, you weren't allowed to be in there. You couldn't come in for spread of the virus. If your loved one was in a nursing home, you were prevented from going into the nursing home because of the fear of the spread of the COVID-19. So there was no communication whatsoever. We've never experienced that in history, where if a loved one was dying or very sick, you weren't able to go to that person, talk to them, reassure them, give them the courage and the confidence, and to tell them how much you love them in person is devastating, is a devastating notion. And we saw that every day in the hospitals. I mean, luckily, the governor announces that it has declined. It is possible it will surge again later into the year because those people that have been shielded are going out now and going to probably pick up viruses. And then the other fear is, you know, what's the next one to come? And we have to be concerned about that. And I know the public schools and a lot of the city agencies are assuming that or anticipating possibly another virus. And so there's the planning of, for example, in public schools where the distant learning is going to continue. They've already said that now. They plan to fully hybrid the education from attendance and video attendance. So, you know, our lives have changed, unfortunately, very quickly. And I think it affects everyone, not only from the economy, but from people who've been basically locked in their homes. And you see it with the protesting, how people are upset. I think it's just another amplification of what's going on in society. We have issues that many of us feel are not being addressed and are not being attended to properly. And we need to examine that and review that. And hopefully we can come together as a society. I remember 9/11. I went down there with my wife, her company, my brother-in-law. They donated the lighting because the power was gone. The buildings were knocked down. There was no electricity. So my wife's company and my brother-in-law, they donated the lights. And I went down there that night, and what you could see was unity. Everybody was together. Everybody was waving the flag, having the flag, putting the flag up. We don't see that today. I don't see the unity in this perilous fight with this pandemic, virus, and enemy. This is a real war. And we've got to be unified. We've got to support each other and put politics aside. There's no question we've got to get justice in this world. And we've got to prosecute the bad people, whether they be cops, anyone, lawyers, judges, doctors. There are bad people in every society, government officials. We go after them, but in terms of the system. But we don't, you know, we can't attack every group, every organization. We've got to show some respect and concern and focus. But overall, we need to stand together. That's my point here. We need to be united like we were 9/11. When I went down there the same night, there was unity. And we went there several days thereafter, there was unity. And we need that in today's times, in today's world. I wish we can get unified together because we all share the same beliefs and concerns, and we all want the best for our families, our country, our society. Okay, so let me get into the COVID-19 situation. As an EMS, EMT, paramedic trained, I'm paramedic trained, we saw a lot of bad things happen. As I said earlier, one of the horror stories doctors or nurses and medical staff and EMS will tell you is the ability for the sick patient not to communicate with their families and loved ones. And that was hard. And again, we shouldn't experience that again. Now, luckily, we have this technology. Like today, we have Zoom, we have Facebook, we have video conferencing where people were able to communicate, but it wasn't the same. It's not the same if you can't shake someone's hand, if you can't hug someone, if you can't kiss someone. It's not the same. And that, to me, was one of the greater horrors of this particular pandemic. Now, in the nursing homes, EMTs, EMS personnel, we know that these are areas where infections are common and rampant. In the fall, viruses are all over the place in the nursing and rehab facilities. You've got the staph infections. You've got all kinds of strep infections. You've got all kinds of viruses, respiratory viruses. We know that when we go into these facilities that we have to take precautions, clear precautions to avoid a spread or a contact of a virus or a bacteria in these facilities. It's common. It's common. So when our government officials decided, and I even say this, the commissioner, the Education Department of Education and Health Commissioner Zucker, Dr. Zucker, mandated that COVID-19 patients be brought back into these facilities. To me, it was mind-boggling. And those who have a understanding of medicine and treatment were startled how you would allow an infected person back into the facility to basically contaminate everybody else in small, confined environments. And these environments in these nursing homes and rehab centers are not the best environments. They're closed environments. They're often warm. People are sick naturally. And then people are constantly going in and out of the facilities, the workers, the staff. A lot of these facilities are understaffed because their basis is purely economics. Unlike hospitals which have the interest of helping improve lives, of course they don't work for free. You've got to pay, you have to have insurance and whatnot. But nursing facilities and rehab centers work for the most part on economics. They need to make money. And their interests are not in alignment with that of a hospital or a doctor's office. So they cut corners, and so these situations are occurring all the time where infections and viruses are spreading rampantly in these facilities. And I was startled when I found out that they were doing this. They were letting the people back in because they were afraid they didn't have enough room in the hospitals. We found out afterwards, it's easy to do Monday morning quarterback. Found out afterwards that we couldn't use the facilities. The ship, the USS Comfort, we couldn't use. The Javits Center we couldn't use. We set up a place in the tennis center in Queens. We set up other facilities throughout the city, weren't used. Thank God. But what was done in the nursing home and rehab centers was almost criminal in my mind because you had medical professionals making a decision to allow this to occur is unspeakable, and justice needs to occur here. The basis of my webinar today, and even beyond that, was extremely troubling to me was legislation put in the wee hours of the morning, where there are several legislators who commented they didn't even know about it, shielding immunity from these facilities, nursing home, rehab centers, hospitals, for any mistakes, any negligence, gross negligence that occurred. They would be shielded immunity. No one is shielded with immunity. If you or I go outside and we make a mistake, okay, we We get into a car accident, we're liable. We go through a stop sign, we're liable. We go through a red light, we're liable. You're riding a bike and you hit someone, you're liable. Why are we shielding these people? There's no excuse for that. And I hope there's some legislators talking about changing that. That has to be changed because the families need to get justice. Anyone who's lost a loved one or family member should not have to increase their suffering and their punishment by allowing things and individuals who made patently wrong decisions to get away with it. They need to get addressed. They need to pay a price, whatever the price is. In our society, we have a civil process where people can sue. And the only remedy in the civil case is money damages. And that's up to a jury, not anyone else for the most part, a judge. The jury would decide whether the person is entitled to money damages as a result of the gross negligence that happened. And for our government, for certain elected officials to take that duty away is incredible to me. It's incredible. It's almost like deciding that certain crimes are not crimes anymore. That's an incredible thing as well. No one should have the authority and the right to do that, to compound the pain and suffering and the damages that occurred. If anything, we always say the purpose of a good lawsuit, litigators always say that we help society, we reform society because we prevent it from happening again. When you see the cases against the big manufacturers with the auto industries, the car manufacturers with the seat belts or the airbags or the cushions, the lawyers helped those who led the fights against the big Goliath corporations, changed the laws, made public safety, they put it on the pedestal, made it important because we helped establish safer ways for corporations to act and for people to act so that people are not wrongly injured for the sake of a buck. And that's my point here. For the sake of a buck, we're going to allow nursing home facilities, rehab centers, and even some hospitals to get away with what they did, what they knew they were doing, and what they did. There's no excuse for that, and no one should be off the hook. You or I, if we commit a violation, whether it's a serious violation or deemed a criminal violation, we will get prosecuted. Why should someone else be able to get off based on monetary reasons alone, particularly when they knew what they were doing? And that has to come to an end. And I'm one of the attorneys that are going full force prosecuting these cases so that families get justice for what was wrongfully done to them. And again, I don't even view this as a mere accident. This is gross negligence because they knew what was happening. They knew the potential of what could happen. When you bring an infected person into a room, a closed environment with other sick people and people with immune compromised body systems, this is all out havoc. It's all out destruction. And there's no excuse for that. We also saw it in the context of the hospitals. You know, people were panicking, we all know. We saw that when we went to the supermarkets to buy food and cleaning supplies. Everything was going, toilet paper, remember the toilet paper? It was a commodity. I never understood that. But we saw it in getting back to the hospitals where people had symptoms. And some of it was, fear, psychosomatic presentations. The mind still controls the body, and you could easily cause your body to feel ill. So they went into the hospitals negative, COVID-19 negative, and they left. They got the virus in the hospital. It was contamination, cross-contamination, and they left, or they were told to leave the hospital with the virus, spreading it further, and in many instances dying. It was an incredible thing how even major hospitals in this city, we have, and I'll say this, when you look around the world, we still have the best hospital system in the world. And I don't just say it, you see it. We have people coming from all over the world. You'll see them to get into our hospitals for treatment. because our hospital system is deemed the best. It is set up emergency. The emergency system is the best medical apparatus possible because it's created to deal with emergency and trauma situations. And we do a great job with that, our hospitals. So we get people from all over the world coming here for medical attention. But the hospitals didn't do the adequate precautions in terms of preventing cross-contamination. People that were infected, then getting infected. There are a lot of interviews with so-called whistleblowing nurses and doctors who have videos of descriptions that happened in Elmhurst Hospital, Queens, or hospitals in Manhattan, where particularly in Elmhurst Hospital, you went in there for, chest pain because you might have been having a heart issue, a heart attack, stress, and you were put into a COVID-19 facility and it exposed you to the virus. And that's just mind-boggling how these things were able to happen. The other tragedy that happened with this COVID-19 situation, again, coming from the top, the State Department of Health Commissioner, Dr. Zucker, telling EMS, EMT personnel, that paramedics, that if a person was having a heart attack and you responded to the home or to the business or wherever the person was in the street, and you felt that that person could not make it, you had to try to resuscitate the person. But in the EMS world, we bring that person into the hospital because we call it the 10-minute golden rule. You got 10 minutes. If you can get to a hospital in 10 minutes, they can do amazing things. They have clot busting drugs. A lot of the specialized hospitals are able to open up veins and arteries quite quickly with stents. The medicine has really advanced tremendously. We're able to save a lot of lives. But to tell the personnel, EMS personnel, well, if you're not getting a positive result on the scene of a person sustaining a heart attack or stroke, they're not coming, they don't have a pulse and they're not breathing on their own, don't bring them into the hospitals because they're overwhelmed. And unfortunately, that killed a lot of people unnecessarily. These are people, in my opinion, not all of them survived, but a good percentage of them survived because of the advancements in the technology and medicine. There's some phenomenal epinephrine can bring a heart that is stopped. Epinephrine, a drug, can bring it back to life. It's just incredible, the advances. And I felt that, and I know that a lot of people died unnecessarily. And even during the pandemic, people were afraid to go to the hospitals, to the doctors. And people died as well because they were afraid to get the medical attention. They were afraid to get it. And that's awfully sad. So we lost a lot of lives unnecessarily. There's a debate right now. The state of New York says of about the 25,000 people that died, about 6,000 to 7,000 died in the nursing home rehab centers. There are other accounts where they claim those numbers are double, because if the person was picked up in a rehab center or nursing facility and then died in the hospital, that wasn't part of the count of the nursing home. So there's Betsy McCoy, the lieutenant governor, a medical specialist. She writes a lot. She says that the numbers are at least 14,000. Just imagine. So if we're saying that almost half of the people that died from COVID-19 died in nursing homes, rehab centers, that's appalling. That's unacceptable. And we should have no law that shields the people that made these decisions. For the families who've suffered, who need to get justice for their loved ones. That's got to come to an end. And
somebody wanted to know who authorized this shielded immunity.
Well, unfortunately, from what I read, I don't know. The shielded immunity was put in, from what we read, from the comments in the papers from legislators and investigative journalists. This was done by the governor. This was done by the legislative leaders in the Senate. the Senate leader, and the Assembly leader. The three people in the room, the three big people in the room, put this in. I understand late into the evening, where the vote had to happen early in the morning or something like that. But I also am impressed that there are some legislators trying to reverse this. Alessandra Biaggi in the Bronx, I understand, is working on this, a senator, and that's encouraging because, again, it's like anything else. Even a kid, you can't let a kid do whatever he or she wants to do. There's got to be punishment when the child does something wrong. Of course, not excessive punishment. We see what's going on with cops that are acting out of control. There are bad, like I said earlier, there are bad cops, there are bad judges, there are bad lawyers, there are bad doctors, there are bad politicians, plenty of them, plenty of bad politicians. I like the way these politicians badmouth police when they're just as bad. Some of them are pure criminals. But yet, everybody has an opinion and everyone has a say, but no one, no family, no loved one should suffer more. Their pain should not be compounded by allowing a wrongdoer, someone who allowed a wrong situation to occur, who knowingly, and I say knowingly, it's not even an accident. They knew the potential problems that could occur. They knew of the possibility. It was in what we call the law, it was foreseeable. It was something that you could foresee. And they allowed it to happen. And I was interviewed by many medical publications, and I say this all the time. I give them my opinion because I have a unique opinion as an EMT/EMS and as a medical malpractice attorney, trial attorney. I have a unique perspective. Nursing homes are, even beyond this pandemic, they're, as I said earlier, they're set to make money. Their bottom line is whether they're in the red or the black, and they have to be sizably in the black. They have to be profitable, unlike our hospitals, which all have to be profitable, but they serve the need to help people. And over the years, I've had numerous cases in nursing homes, rehab centers of bed sores. You have to see these bed sores. They're not just, burns. Basically, they look like burns where your flesh is exposed and you see the blood. But some of them go to the bone. It's an incredible thing to see where on your buttock, you'll turn the person around and you'll see the bone. On their thigh, you'll see the bone. The terrible treatment of people. Now, I'm not going to blame the staff because I've seen these places. They're overworked. I've been in the emergency rooms as a paramedic trained student. We had to do rotations in nursing homes, in hospitals, and the nurses were the hardest workers in the hospitals, hardest workers. And every good doctor in an emergency room or hospital will tell you that their backbone is the nurse, because the nurse does everything. They keep the hospitals going. They work the hardest. And in all the hospitals I've been in this city, public and private, the nurses work the hardest. And we have to give them a lot of credit for the great job that they do. But getting back to the nursing home rehab centers, the falls, over the years, I've had numerous cases where the patients fell and broke a hip, broke a leg, broke an arm. It's terrible. Bed sores, gangrene, poor nutrition, even not having enough hydration or food sustenance. It's incredible. But these things happen, and we've got to make changes. And hopefully, the purpose of today is to make these changes, like the lawyers who fought the big auto manufacturers for safety. We've got to do this, and we've got to lead the fight here. We have all these protests. We should also be protesting about these nursing home rehab centers. They've got to change the way they do business, and they have to look out for our loving seniors. And not only just a senior citizen, you fall, you have a bad injury, you have an operation, you could be a young person, you'll wind up in a rehab center. You are also vulnerable to get sick or to die from malpractice.
So John, now can our attendees reach out to you if they have had a family member who's in this situation and be able to see what their options are? And
Absolutely.
wonderful. And I've given them their email address. I'd love to save, this is such valuable information, but I also want to save some time for you to share with us about estate planning.
Yeah,
And
I'm going to shift into that. Let me
wonderful.
just finish up with I'm done with the nursing homes, the rehab centers, the hospitals. We heard the governor, an eloquent speaker, state, and the mayor, we need ventilators, ventilators, ventilators. You know, you're going to kill the people. Who are we to decide? They would say, who are we to decide who to put a person on a ventilator, who not to put a person on, who to save, who to kill. Well, they didn't understand. You know, the problem with this pandemic also is that you had the wrong people making decisions, and they often made mistakes and they made wrong decisions. One of the wrong decisions I saw I was on calling radio shows and stuff. I was being interviewed. I said, you can't put everyone on a ventilator. A ventilator is a unique machine that the average doctor doesn't know how to utilize. The average nurse doesn't know how to utilize. You need a respiratory specialist to operate a ventilator. It's a very sophisticated machine. And it's to the point where you need fine percussion and tuning. It's like a fine instrument. You've got to tune the ventilator to the person's breathing and sustenance. It's a special operation. And I said, by throwing all these people on ventilators, you're going to kill them. I was on news programs. And it turned out I was right. Because in the hospitals that didn't have enough respiratory specialists, they weren't equipped for it. We understood that the average nurse and doctor couldn't operate a ventilator. And so you're seeing unnecessary deaths with people that were just thrown on ventilators. And it was then just determined later on that oxygen was a much better therapy, to put a person on a mask with oxygen O2 with proper saturation. They would have done better than on a ventilator. So even the ventilators cause unnecessary deaths. And why are we to allow facilities to get away with pure medical negligence? Is amazing. It's mind-boggling to me. But again, it's another situation. Let me jump into, and then we'll get to some questions. As you said, estates and wills and trusts. Now, we've lost so many people in such a short period of time due to the pandemic. Surrogate court is the court, whether in Queens or Brooklyn or any other part of the city, is the court, and in most states, that deals with people who die, their estates, whether it's a will. If a person has a will, it has to go to the surrogate judge to make the decision if the will gets probated or not. All the time, issues come up with people who pass away. Now, most people either have a will, and everybody knows what that is for the most part. You give your assets at the time of your death, or they have now a trust, which is a great instrument, particularly in today's times. Why? Because all these people that passed away, I would say about 90% of them didn't have trusts. 60% didn't have wills. And so there's going to be a flood of cases coming into the surrogate court. Now, in Queens County, we only have one surrogate judge, and they won't be able to deal with all these cases. And the court's resources have gradually been diminished over the years with the budgets. And with our economy right now, it's only going to get worse. So there's going to be a major problem in surrogate court administering these wills. It's going to take possibly years. I hope not, but I don't see the light over there. I see a tremendous problem with all the families coming to the surrogate asking for relief, asking for a will to be probated, asking if you don't have a will, you have to do a proceeding in surrogate court. It's called administration. It's a separate proceeding. You have to file an application. You have to either hire a lawyer or don't hire a lawyer, provide a family tree, ask to look into the assets of the person who died, and then ask the court to distribute it according to the law of intestacy. Now, a will tells you how the person wants their assets distributed. I want it to my wife and my kids. I want it to many times people are single or their spouses died. I want it to my neighbor. I want it to my cousin. I want it to my uncle. I want it to some charity. These decisions have to be made by the surrogate. And it's a complicated, long, drawn-out process. It's a very tedious process. And as I said, the will describe how the assets are going to go, and it's up to the judge to really, the surrogate judge to approve of it. Most of the times people don't have the will, so it's a more, same kind of process, but it takes much longer. They have to find out that there were heirs, cousins, do a family tree. But ultimately, again, the surrogate judge is going to make the decision. You're going through a process. The trust is, particularly in this situation right now, is the best thing to have, because basically there are two kinds of trusts. A trust where the grantor, the person who creates the trust, puts all their assets in the trust and walks away and says, listen, this is the trust. I need this to keep me going, to pay my rent. I want a check every month, but everything's in the trust and it's going to go to the beneficiary of the trust. Or they have a trust that is revocable and they say, well, I'll put everything in the trust because I don't want to be sued and I want protection. I don't want a will. I don't want to have to go to surrogate's court because there's going to be a fight in the family. But I do want to be able to revoke the trust. And those are good. They're not good for Medicaid. Medicaid likes the irrevocable trust. But let me get into Medicaid because that feels a lot of questions. The laws are changing and they're going to, first of all, on October 1st, families could get Medicaid. You could be, and some people disagreed with it, some agreed with it. You could be, you could have the wealth of a Michael Bloomberg and get Medicaid if you, up until October 1st, had nurses come or nurses' aides come to the home. You would get Medicaid. And that was a great tool for a lot of people, not only the wealthy people, but the people that didn't have wealth, to know that they could get these services at home as opposed to going to a nursing home. They did that because it was much cheaper for the city and the state to pay for an assisted nurse to come home than to be treated in a facility, a nursing home. Which the average nursing home right now is about $15,000 to $20,000 in this city a month. So you could ravage through a person's life savings in a matter of months or years. They could lose everything. And there's insurance for that, but it's very expensive, long-term insurance. Most people can't afford it. So that's changing. So in October 1st, there's going to be a look-back period where you won't be able to get that free nursing assistance at home because they're going to look back to see what you did with your assets. And if you gave it to your daughter, if you bought your son a house, your daughter a condo, your grandson a car, you paid for their college tuition or graduate school, they're going to look back and they're going to say, wait, you got to get that, we got to get that money back. And that's going to be one of the changes. But I anticipate there's going to be even far greater changes. We've got tremendous budgetary issues. We're in the red all over from the city and the state. So I think a lot of this, the federal government's not giving the money. I think a lot of the Medicaid planning is going to change, and things are going to be awry with everything new and things that people relied on that they felt they could get, and to avoid planning and losing assets, preserving assets, paying as little estate tax as possible. Those things are going to change. That's my opinion, because our cities are in dire need of money, our state is in dire need of money, and our federal government is in dire need of money. So they're going to eliminate all these, I'm sure, these programs. Getting back to what I'm trying to say, so you understand you have a will, you don't have a will, you got either way, will or no will, you go to the surrogate's court if you have assets. If you have no assets, you don't need to go to the surrogate. Most people have assets. So the trust is the best instrument. You have the revocable and the irrevocable trust. The trust is important to get the right attorney. You know, Michael Jackson, when he passed away, the musician, the famous musician Michael Jackson, he hired top-notch estate planning lawyers. You know, he had money. And they set up a trust for him. But guess what they didn't do? They set the trust, it was a nice document, but they didn't put the assets in the trust. So not only do you have to set up people don't realize you have to set up a trust, but you have to put all your assets into the trust. So if you have a house, that house has to go change the name from your name into the trust. If you have a commercial property, it has to go into the name of the trust. If you have stocks, it has to go into the name of the trust. Certain other assets has to go into the name of the trust. And if you don't do that, the trust doesn't dictate. It switches back. You lose the trust benefits, and you now got to go back to the surrogate court to do an administration if you didn't have a will. Okay, so you wind back up into the surrogate's court. And not to take anything away from surrogates, they do a great job, but you don't want to be in surrogate's court because it's expensive. You have to hire an attorney. It's easy to be challenged. A fight is easy. Anyone can contest, any family bloodline can contest a will. I'll tell you a story that would blow your mind. I spoke to a real estate broker who told me that he had an individual who married another person for the purposes of immigration. They used to do that, and it's not legal, but they hire people. He got paid to marry the person for immigration purposes, and someone had killed him. And although they weren't married, in fact, he was a gay person, and she was an immigrant, and they weren't related. They were married, and for the purposes of citizenship, someone killed him, and she wound up with all his assets. Okay, that's just an example of the craziness of what can happen. There was never an intention for him to give her not $1. She had paid him for the purposes of marriage so that she can become a citizenship. That was the only relationship. Now, that's not legal, but it's done. And it was done in that particular case. Shouldn't
That
be
shows how very important
example of a crazy situation. And then let me just bring it further down the line. I've had people over the years say, I was married when I was a little girl, or I was married when I was 24, and my spouse left and they went to, the Dominican Republic. They went to Ecuador. They went to Colombia. I haven't seen them. I think they're alive. I'm told they're alive, but I haven't seen them. Do I have to worry about it if I die? I mean, this person never gave me support. They never gave me money. They didn't raise my child. They don't have to get my money, do they? Absolutely. If they're married, you could have the worst marriage relationship. That person will take up to 1/3 of your estate, even if they haven't been with you. So people have to know that. And you see situations where people assume that because the person left and in another country, they could remarry again, and they do. And you got a battle of two spouses saying, wait, I was married to her in 1954. And then the second one says, well, I just married her 6 years ago. So the craziness, stuff you couldn't write as a fiction, you're going to see it.
demonstrating how important it is.
We read the papers every day. We rub our eyes and say, wow, I couldn't make this up if I was a fiction writer.
You're certainly demonstrating the importance of estate planning and some of the extreme things that can happen. But day to day, what's happening is people are getting stuck in probate court, or they're having arguments with their family. And that's a very difficult thing to do when you're grieving. And so when you can have an estate plan ahead, you can make sure that this doesn't happen to you. So that's really very much an important point that I think that people will take from this. And John, I'd like to ask you some of the questions that our guests have been asking. So in terms, just going back a little bit to the nursing home situation, people wanted to know, is it possible that there's going to be a class action lawsuit? Do you see that as something coming down the pike?
It's a good question. I don't think you need a class action. The class action lawsuit is specifically derived when you're going up against a huge company, a pharmaceutical company, makes a drug, Vioxx, when they made these drugs, and they knew they could cause heart problems. There was scientific evidence that the plaintiff's attorneys found that proved that they knew what they were doing, but they took an economic decision. They figured they could make more money pushing the drug out, selling the drug, than dealing with cases coming in of people dying of heart attacks. when you're going up against a giant like that, you need a class action because whether it's an automotive company, a GM, a Ford, or a pharmaceutical company, a huge pharmaceutical company, they have unlimited resources, almost like the federal government or the state government. They have unlimited resources. They hire the best trial attorneys, the biggest firms. They have the juror interviews. They have everyone. They put out panels. They come in with panels before the trial to try to gauge what kind of questions need to be asked of jurors, how to pick jurors. You see the show on the Bull on TV, it's similar to that. But on these cases, you don't need that because each case is individual. All you need is to go to an attorney who does malpractice and you present your own case against the hospital, the nursing home, the rehab center. You don't need the class action. It won't go to class actions. I don't see it because it's not the same. It's not the same kind of case. You're not up against a giant. Here, it's an individual. It's similar to any other medical malpractice or negligence case.
So it's really better for people to
Yeah, do it individually because particularly if you're trying the case, okay? With the class action case, you bring one plaintiff representative of the class, one person, and the injuries are similar, substantially similar. When they're settling them, though, they determine what the ultimate sacrifices were made of the patient. Here, bringing the case individually is a much better way of finishing it faster and getting the appropriate justice based on your client's matter.
There isn't this immunity, so they are able to go and sue nursing homes. What people are also asking, what about hospitals, New York State? Are those people that would?
Great question. You know, the state has a immunity on a lot of issues, but you know they passed this law. As I said earlier, there's some legislators trying to change it. Kudos to them. They're doing the right thing because they claim they weren't aware of it. It was put in late at night or early in the morning, right before the vote of the, you know, it was slipped in. It was terrible, terrible. We claim we're a democratic process. We do a lot of things fascist governments wouldn't do. This is one of them, one of the examples of compounding a horrendous action where these people knew what they were doing. It's not even an accident. They knew that if you brought a patient into a hospital that didn't have COVID-19, they would have a great chance of picking it up because of the spreading and the contamination of putting all people in the same area. When you go into the ER area, you're going to pick up viruses, respiratory infections. Same thing with nursing and rehab facilities. So
what about people who are trying to visit people in nursing homes? You know, is there anything that can be done about that? And
terrible. You know, you weren't allowed to see. Just imagine Mother's Day. You couldn't see your mom if she was in a nursing home. It was, as I started earlier in the program, it was the most horrific thing one could imagine. Dehumanized people. Something we've never experienced. I read it has never. Even when we had the pandemic in the 1918, the Spanish flu, the pandemic. We've had the Asian flu in the 60s and the Japanese flu and whatever. We never did that. We never said, you can't come in. Usually in a hospital setting where you have a person with tuberculosis, a very contagious disease that can contaminate very quickly. So you go into, that person is put in a single room with a mask and you're told to go in, you have to wear a mask, gloves, and you have to take special precautions when you go in as a guest. But you're allowed to go in. But you're advised you better take precautions. You better wear a mask, have gloves, because it's a highly contagious disease. Well, this time around, they said, no way. Even if your loved one, your mother, your father, your child, your uncle was dying. And they would say, you know, it's affected the heart. They don't have much time. You couldn't pay your last respects to them in person. And that's something we've never seen before. And that should never happen again. That should never happen, in my opinion. It should never happen again.
What can someone do with their father passed away from and had COVID, but the death certificate says of natural causes? Is this a legal issue that they have to deal with, excuse me, to make sure that COVID is listed on the death certificate?
That's a really great question. And yes, you have to do some investigation. You have to pull the medical records and have them looked at. And you need a professional to do that, medical malpractice attorney. When we do medical malpractice cases, we have an obligation that we swear under oath that we spoke to a physician who reviewed the records and determined that this is a case to prosecute, that medical malpractice occurred. And what medical malpractice is in New York and in all the states in this great United States is a deviation from the standard of care. Okay, and I like to say this, I created this, deviation from the standard of care of the practice. So if you were a student, I like to say, if you were a student and you got an A, you weren't deviating from care. You got a B, you weren't deviating from care. You got a C, you weren't deviating from care. You got a D, you didn't deviate from care. Just imagine. But if you got an F, you did. Okay? That's when you deviated from care. You failed because you went beyond that. There's a huge, I like to say, huge circle. And if you go beyond that spear, then you deviated the standard of care. When you broke through the circle, you deviated the standard of care. It's very difficult to bring a medical malpractice case. People don't understand. It's not similar to a car accident case, a trip and fall case, a contract case. It's a quite different item to prosecute. You've got to, again, have the medical expert behind you. And doctors and nurses and hospitals are afforded errors. They can make errors, but their errors have to be within that circle. Once you break that circle, once the error goes beyond the circle, once you get an F instead of a D, then you can go after them. And it's up to ultimately the jury to say, well, they're going to have to pay a civil price or not. And most cases that go to trial against doctors and hospitals result in defendant verdicts. Plaintiffs lose. People have to understand. It's not easy.
So people are able to sue assisted care living facilities, nursing homes. These are all something that, you know, they can speak to you about, and
Yes.
they can have liability. Okay. Well, we also have some questions about wills and trusts that I'd love to get a chance to. Running out of time, and I appreciate your generosity with your time. Someone asked, do all of your assets have to be in a trust? And what assets are protected by naming beneficiaries?
A good question. When you name beneficiaries, you'll see it in bank accounts, you'll see it in stocks, you'll see it in certain securities, and even in real estate, you'll say that you could put in trust, you know, or with survivorship, you'll see the term survivorship. Often the time a husband and wife will buy a house together, and it will give, if one of them passes away, it goes to the other spouse. They don't have to go to surrogate's court. It transfers. So when you give it to a beneficiary, it goes automatically to the benefit. You avoid court. That's a great means. But there are other items that you can't have beneficiaries. There are certain property, you can't have a beneficiary for a car. People set up accounts and they don't put beneficiaries. An IRA is another example of often at times people don't put beneficiaries down. It's nice to put a beneficiary because it avoids probate. All the person has to do is show a death certificate to the bank, to the security company, and they get the property without, again, going to court. The trust, getting to the trust part of your question, it's important. As we saw with Michael Jackson, he set up a great trust, but he didn't put all his assets in the trust. So if the asset's not in the trust means nothing, okay? The trust means nothing. It's like a will. If the person is alive, the will means nothing. The will comes to life. It's the phoenix that comes to life when a person dies.
That's very good advice. That's very, very good advice, because someone could think that they're doing all the right things and miss it, as happened with
You'd be surprised at what can happen. You know, we're all human beings. whether you look at the doctor, you look at the nurse, you look at the lawyer, the judge, we're all human beings. We make mistakes.
We know that everyone makes mistakes, but obviously you have tremendous experience. So how does one pick an attorney for their estate planning, or for, a situation where there's negligence and they want to, get justice for their loved one?
Well, it's important to know that right now, like I said, the law right now prevents, for the most part, cases being brought against nursing homes, rehab centers, hospitals, unless it's like extreme gross negligence, almost to like a criminal. To me, it's like, they intentionally tried to kill your loved one. Impossible to prove. But people like me and some other, not everyone, but some malpractice attorneys are still taking these cases on, because we feel that we can get the justice that by the time we get to a judge in the court system, you start a lawsuit, you got to serve it. It gets to a process where you go before a judge, that the law will be changed, or at least we're hoping the judges make decisions that they have to allow these cases. They have to allow these cases to go to the jury. Let the jury decide. A jury of our peers. That's what our great nation is founded on. A jury of our peers to determine if an injustice occurred, and then to determine if justice will be served, and in what capacity will it be served.
Very good. Let me ask one more question. I know that we're pressed for time. And again, I appreciate everyone being here and your wonderful generosity with the information. But someone had a question that dad had a will and passed before mom. Mom did not have a will. There's only one surviving adult child. Does dad's will determine what happens to the assets? And mom is in a nursing home at this time.
Dad passed away before mom had a will. So it's a great question. Dad's will would have to be probated. Now, I don't know what dad's will said. Dad's will could have said everything to mom, and then if mom passes away, everything to the child. Or dad could have said, you know what, I don't want my wife to get anything. I want it all to go to the child. Now, in New York, we have a Spouse Protection Act, and it prevents a spouse from leaving a married person out, the other spouse out of their estate. They can't do that. We created this special legislation that prevented a husband, because we saw in many communities, spouses, men, particularly men, and that, I don't want to pick on men, but I'm a man, would try to prevent their wife from inheriting any of their assets. We saw that a lot, and it's true in some cultures. Some cultures believe that. So we created this law to prevent that. Now, in this particular, let me try to answer I would need more facts to say that, but basically, we'd have to look at the assets. If dad had a house and it was in mom's name, it makes no difference, because most likely it passed to mom. But if there were other assets in dad's name, because mom didn't have a will, you have to set up an administration for mom with the surrogate. It's a proceeding, as I mentioned earlier, where you don't have a will, but you're going before the surrogate. You fill out an application. You're stating, here are mom's assets, and this is how it should be distributed, because I'm the only son, and I'm the one who benefits. And you do an administration. You could also probate dad's will. If it wasn't done before mom died, the attorney has to make a decision, a strategy called to say, is it necessary to probate the dad's will? If mom was going to get anything, then it wasn't necessary to probate dad's will. We'll leave that alone, and we'll just focus on mom's estate. So.
Right. Well, it certainly shows too how important it is to reach out, because everybody's situation is so different, and there are so many different avenues that it could go down, and it would be impossible for a lay person to be able to know what's the right thing to do and what's going to happen. So I want to let all of our attendees know I've sent your contact information, and they'll get an email with your contact information again. But please, if you have questions and want to want to set up your estate planning so that you're not in the situation that we discussed. And also, if you have a loss of a loved one who was in a nursing home and died because of COVID, you know, John is powerful and a wonderful advocate and a great place to start. So please reach out to him. He will also be able to reach out to you as well. But don't wait for that. Please reach out to John, and he can answer your questions. John, I thank you so very much for your time. You're generous with your information. Thank you
for keeping me in orbit, for being my
Thank you for the incredible work that you're doing. Keep on. And thanks so much for sharing some time with us, everybody. Thank you for being here. Please stay safe, stay healthy. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Schneps Media webinar. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.